This is the story of an alien encounter here at Rendlesham Forest on the 26th and 28th of December 1980. It's been called Britain's Roswell. Some people refer to it as the most believable and well-documented alien encounter case in the world, even surpassing Roswell for many. The events that unfolded here are so fantastical, so outrageous and so seemingly otherworldly that most logical people just immediately write it off. But many who look a little deeper become immediately transfixed. And I believe that's due to one main reason. It's the people who witnessed and told of the events. These weren't two drunk men staggering back from the pub. They were seasoned United States airmen, stationed at RAF Woodbridge at the height of the Cold War. These are not people prone to flights of fancy. They are used to flights of war, serving the United States and its allies. Why would they make up ridiculous tales? So we have credible, named and reliable witnesses to seemingly incredible events, which have captured the attention of the world. And we have something else. We have physical evidence and corroborating evidence from authorities not even involved in that night's events. Well, we think we have. There's enough evidence of an extraterrestrial encounter here at Rendlesham Forest to satisfy even the most hardened critics, like me. Over the years, there have been countless TV shows, movies, articles, books, websites, and videos dedicated to what happened here over 2 nights in December 1980. There's even a fun UFO trail here in the forest, complete with a replica landing craft, to commemorate the events of over 40 years ago. But is the story really so fantastical? The chances of us being alone in the universe are actually quite woeful. There's 100 billion galaxies in the universe, each containing about 1 billion trillion stars. And those stars host, wait for it, 700 quintillion planets. Look it up. A quintillion is even more than a squillion. That's a lot of planets. So it's highly likely, and actually more than likely, that life, and even intelligent life, is out there somewhere. But even the closest Earth-like planet is 4 years' travel away. And that's if you travel at the speed of light. In the highly unlikely event that intelligent life resides literally next door, in astronomical terms, would the alien race really make that journey just to spook a bunch of US airmen stationed just outside Ipswich? So, we were visited by aliens at Christmas time in 1980. Or maybe a series of perfectly explainable events and phenomena happened simultaneously, so convincingly that grown men, experienced airmen, were fooled to the extent that the world is still talking about it today. It's been debunked by cleverer minds than me, but people debunk the debunks, and before we know it, we're back to where we started. That's the thing about Rendlesham Forest. I think that's why it's so enduring. There's no easy answers, even when you think you have them. Expect no satisfying conclusion to this video. I'll give you my opinion at the end, but for tidy-minded viewers who like everything wrapped up in a neat little bow, you may be disappointed. But for everyone else, please stick around as we investigate Britain's Roswell, one of, if not the, most compelling alien encounter stories in the world. We need to start at the very beginning, and this part is nothing to do with the American airmen at the centre of this case. A nearby British Royal Air Force radar station was on full alert in December 1980. They were monitoring a night flying exercise. They picked up a signal from an unknown object in the direction of Rendlesham Forest. This caused alarm because there should have been nothing in that area at that time. It appeared to be stationary. They reported the unidentified object and sent a jet out to investigate. The pilot, within a quarter of a mile of the location, reported a brilliantly bright light in front of him. He then observed it accelerating away at tremendously high speed. The rapid ascent of the object was observed on radar screens, and it was tracked to 90,000 feet before it was lost off the top end of the radar scope. The apparent radar operator, and I've got no reason to suppose it wasn't the radar operator, has since appeared on a television programme confirming this story, and stated that no current technology could achieve the moves and speeds witnessed on radar screens that night. Sometime later that evening, military service personnel at Woodbridge Air Base were completing their nightly patrols. The base at that time was being operated by the US Air Force. It was a key strategic base at the height of the Cold War. At 3 a.m. on the 26th of December, John Burroughs and a colleague were stationed here as patrolmen at the east gate of the airfield. They spotted strange lights out in the forest. Airman John Burroughs says that his first thought was it was a Christmas light display. They went to take a closer look and concluded that no, they were definitely not Christmas lights. The entire forest was lit up with strange lights. Whatever it was, he deemed it to be dramatic, unnerving. This was like something he'd never experienced before. They rushed back to base to inform security control. explained what he'd seen and he was in no mood to take no for an answer. He demanded assistance and backup. Sergeant Jim Penniston was alerted by security and he was asked to liaise with Burrows here at the East Gate. From an initial assessment of the scene, Jim wondered if there'd been an air crash. He dealt with many of them over the course of his career. He called security to inform them of his concerns, and they stated that an unidentified craft had been picked up on radar. They'd had these radar anomalies confirmed by the local RAF station, and also Heathrow Airport. Penniston was informed that the last known radar sighting was 5 miles from Woodbridge Base. Penniston sought permission to leave the base to investigate. That was granted, and he took along Burrows and other service personnel. Following UK rules, they were forced to leave their guns behind and approached the scene unarmed. They were now in civilian areas. They drove through the forest towards the lights. They eventually had to stop the car and proceed on foot. Penniston is then quoted as saying, "I started to see a defined shape." It was at this point that he realised that this was no air crash, and certainly not Christmas lights. As they approached, Penniston would later describe the air being filled with electricity. Then, one of the most remarkable elements of this story, Penniston said he saw a craft. He described it as the size of a tank, with a high-intensity bright white light shining down from it. He said the craft was bordered by red and blue bright lights. It was initially viewed high up in the trees, but Penniston said it then landed and they walked around it, making notes in his notebook. Notes such as, type of aircraft, unknown, no landing gear, appears to be pulsing somehow. He said it landed, he said he touched it, and he said the craft was warm. He went into incredible detail. He said the craft bore an inscription of symbols measuring 6 inches high. The craft was eventually observed taking off. Eventually shooting off, in Penniston's words, as fast as you could blink. The next morning, they conducted an examination of the area. They said that they found indentations on the ground, broken branches all over the place. There were scuff marks and burn marks on the trees. They measured the distance between the indentations and found it made an exact triangle. The next day, the event had come to the attention of Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt. He authorised observations of the area, which included positioning huge lighting rigs in the forest in the hope that if anything happened on subsequent nights, they'd get a better view. In the early hours of 28th of December, Colonel Charles Holt was enjoying a Christmas party at the RAF base, but he was sent for by his men. They told him, "It's back." "What's back?" he asked them. "The UFO's back, sir." At this point, Holt was rather cool about it. His primary goal, he said, was to completely debunk this sighting. They had some specialised equipment, including a night scope and a Geiger counter. Holt also took along a voice recorder so he could be sure to record everything he saw. The tape he made that night has become part of UFO folklore. Charles Holt entered the forest with a team of 30 men, determined to find a logical explanation as to what was going on.
150 feet or more from the initial, I should say, suspected impact point. Heavy lift going, they can't get the light all to work. Seems to be some kind of mechanical problem. Let's send back, get another light. You can tell we're going to take some readings with the Geiger counter and chase around here a little bit, wait for another light off to muck in.
The lighting rigs that they'd set up failed to work properly. They switched them for new units from the base. They wouldn't work properly either.
We found a small blast, what looks like a blasted or scruffed up area here. We got very positive readings. See, is that here the center? Yes, it is. This is what we would assume would be the dead center. Just picking up more as you go along the whole area.
Their radios were intermittent too. Whichever channel they switched to, they couldn't maintain comms.
Each one of these trees that face into the flats, what we assume is a landing site, all have an abrasion facing in the same direction towards the center. There's a round abrasion on the tree about 3.5 4 inches in diameter. It looks like it might be old, but strange as a crystalline pine sap that's come out that fast. See those other trees here that are damaged in similar fashion? Yes, so I'll make toward the center of the landing. Okay, why don't you take a picture of that and remember your picture, and you gotta be writing this down. It's gonna be on the tape.
Then, dramatically, Holt's men drew his attention to unusual lights.
Directly overhead, one can see an opening in the trees, plus some freshly broken pine branches on the ground underneath. Looks like someone came off about 15 to 20 feet up. Some small branches about an inch or less in diameter. 148, we're hearing very strange sounds out of the farmers barnyard animals. Very, very active, making an awful lot of noise. You just saw a light there. Wait a minute. Where? Right in this position here, straight ahead, in between the tree. There it is again. Watch, straight ahead off my flash right there. There it is. Hey, I see it too.
And they ended up chasing the lights, ending up at the edge of the forest. Whatever they saw was brightly lit. It was described like an eye winking at you. Charles Halt said that around the edges of this light, of whatever it was, had what looked like molten metal dripping from it, though he couldn't find any evidence of that on the forest floor.
Is it back again? Yes, sir. Oh, that's the flashlight set. Let's move out to the edge of the clearing so I can get a better look at it. See if you can get the star scope on it. The light's still there, and all the barnyard animals have gotten quiet now. Yeah, we're heading about 110 to 120 degrees from the site. I'm through to the clearing now. Still getting a reading on the meter. About 2 clicks.
They were reporting higher than normal readings from their Geiger counter, and they were focusing on marks on the trees from the events 2 nights prior. He was trying to debunk what he'd been told, but here he was being confronted by things he just couldn't explain. The night vision scopes were picking up heat projections from the trees. He noticed that branches had been freshly broken, 15 to 20 feet up in the trees.
Everything else is just deathly calm. There's no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. It's yellow. I saw a yellow tinge in it too. Weird. It appears to be making a little bit this way. Yes, it's right on past that. Yellow. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way. Pieces of it are shooting off. There is no doubt about it. This is weird.
Halt said it was a silent explosion, which broke the object up into several pieces, and then they just disappeared. John Burroughs was still working on the broken down lighting rigs when a blue light streaked past him. The broken lights came on as the streak went past. He even saw it go through the open windows on his truck. The streak then raced off into the distance, and the lights went out again. As Halt headed out of the forest with his men, he noticed 3 more strange lights in the sky. He said they moved about in the sky in angular sharp movements at very high speed. He said one of the objects in the sky was sending down beams of light. At one point, a beam of light, he said, shone down directly on him and his men. So, put the events of the 26th of December together with the investigation that took place on the 28th of December, then you have compelling evidence of a visit by extraterrestrial life. So how can that lot be debunked? We have independent evidence from independent radar stations. We have physical damage to trees, markings, indentations on the landing site. We even have a tape recording of one of the events, talking us through in real time exactly what was seen and experienced on the night. We have bright flashing lights. We have lights moving in a rapid angular fashion, beams of light shining down into the forest, even onto the men. And as I stated at the very start of the video, we have witnesses, and not just any witnesses. We have first-hand written testimony, written reports from dozens of men, airmen from the US Air Force. For me, one of the most startling claims of this UFO encounter came not from Halt, but from Penniston. He claims to have touched the craft on the first night, and he had a notebook with him where he logged events. He would later claim to have observed the craft on the ground, walking around it for 45 minutes. UFO enthusiasts have had a field day with this case over the last 43 years. But so have the debunkers. Cleverer minds than me have analysed this case. None more clever than Ian Ridpath, journalist and astronomy enthusiast. He was the first journalist to report on this story, and he's maintained a keen interest in it over the last 40 years. Ian and many others believe they have a simple and rational explanation for everything that happened that night. I'm going to go through some of the key areas now that are ripe for debunking. But before I do that, please give me just 25 seconds to plug this channel and to introduce you to the sponsor of this video. Very nearly interesting as a brand new channel, and I need all the help I can get. If you like this video, please click like. That way YouTube will show it to more people. And please consider subscribing. That way we might see you again, and you might watch more of our content. This video was made possible by playbark.com. They sell everything you need to create an outdoor play area at home for your children or grandchildren. They can even come to your home and install a bonded rubber play surface, just like you see at the playground. Please visit playbark.com. There's a link in the description. With the independent radar observations. The News of the World newspaper was the first newspaper to report that an unidentified object had been seen on radar screens, and it's an often repeated feature of any retelling of the Rendlesham UFO case. TV interviews have been given by radar operators, but when journalists and researchers have written to the Ministry of Defence, each time they were told that nothing unusual was observed. Despite the newspaper stories and television interviews, there has never been irrefutable evidence unearthed from the authorities to substantiate these claims. So it seems likely that no, nothing was picked up on radar. Is this evidence of cover-up by the authorities? Or are there unscrupulous actors in this story, making things up? An obvious and rather startling explanation for some of the unusual lights comes from the British Astronomical Association. They issued a newsletter in February 1981 detailing a fireball which was observed in southern England. The time given for the fireball was within 5 minutes of the supposed UFO sighting here at Rendlesham Forest. Many people saw it, not just in Rendlesham. The description of a light given by a security guard at the base fits exactly with what could be expected of a fireball, which essentially is natural space debris, like meteors, burning up in the Earth's atmosphere. They are totally silent, but they can often give the impression that something has fallen to Earth nearby. They're often mistaken for UFOs. This time does fit with the initial sightings of a bright object in the sky seen by security personnel at the base. Meteors entering the atmosphere can often be very dramatic. Some of the statements given by the men talked of green luminescent trails, and these are commonly associated with meteors and fireballs. Did these fireballs kick off the entire chain of events here at Rendlesham, followed by a string of strange coincidences? The sighting of the craft. The only person to have stated in their original written report to have seen not only lights but an actual physical object was Sergeant Penniston. This is from his original report to superiors just after the incident. Burrows and I were approximately 15 to 20 metres apart and proceeding on a true east direction. When we got within a 50-metre distance, the object was producing red and blue lights. The blue light was steady and projecting under the object. Positive sighting of the object. It was definitely mechanical in nature. We heard earlier on that Penniston observed and walked around the craft for 45 minutes, making notes in a notebook, but that detail is missing from his original statement. Why would he leave out such stunning detail? Many point to the fact that over the years, his story has changed. Well, it's been added to at least, compared to his original statement. So much so that many consider his testimony to be unreliable. Did he maybe hold back on the detail when he was working at the base and subsequently felt freer to speak that now he's a civilian, and that's why his story has become more involved in subsequent years? Initially, Penniston said he got no closer than 50 metres from the craft. Over the years, he seems to have closed that distance to the point where he's actually touching it. So what could it have been on Boxing Day in the early hours of the 26th of December 1980? Most of the men's original statements focus on chasing unknown lights throughout the forest, and there was no initial mention of a craft except from Penniston. On the same morning, within a few hours of the supposed UFO landing, the UK police started to investigate. They were taken to the suspected landing site and shown the 3 indentations on the ground. Subsequent measurements have determined that these 3 indentations made a perfect triangle. By the sounds of things, the UK police didn't get quite as excited as the US airmen. The police report dismissed these indentations as nothing more than rabbit diggings, a claim that stunned Holt afterwards because he noted that the ground was completely frozen, so could not have been caused by any animal. It's not clear that the men knew exactly where the object had landed. Apparently they didn't mark the area at the time, but went back later to look for signs of a disturbance that could be attributable to the supposed craft. It was claimed that branches had been newly snapped off, consistent with a large craft descending and disturbing the trees. They said the forest floor was strewn with branches, and that leads us to the next character in our story. Vince Thurkettle was a forestry worker at the time of the incident. He was aware that something had gone on because a couple of days after this incident, he was approached by 2 men in suits whilst he was chopping wood in the forest. After all, without Men in Black characters showing up, is this really a UFO sighting in the first place? He was peppered with questions from the men about strange lights that had been seen in the forest. It wouldn't be for 3 years before he found out what all the fuss was about, but he did hear rumours just after his mysterious visit, and he visited the scene. He told the BBC what he found was nothing. He said he saw 3 rabbit scrapes, which happened to be in the shape of a triangle. The Americans had left the scene with several sticks placed around it. Vince, an experienced woodsman, says it was nothing unusual. It was a completely natural glade. Yes, there were broken branches, but the forest is full of broken branches. The supposed burn marks on the trees weren't from extraterrestrial craft, he reckoned, but axe marks from a ranger. He even named him. It was Bill Briggs who did that. thing consistent across both nights of action in the forest was the mysterious flashing light that the men chased for 2 miles. I am stood right now in the spot that the men got to on the edge of the forest. I can't proceed into the field because there's now a fence. This part of the story was debunked by Vince Thurkettle in 1983 and later comprehensively debunked by Ian Ridpath, but many still will not accept the debunk. The spot where Holt claims to have seen the flashing light directly in line with the farmhouse at the edge of the forest is indeed in perfect line of sight with the Orford Ness Lighthouse, sadly long since demolished. In fact, the time between the flashes on the lighthouse have been shown to align with what was said on the tape, and they were able to measure the timings of the light going around the lighthouse. It matched the tape exactly.
Where? Right in this position here, straight ahead, in between the tree. There it is again. Watch, straight ahead off my flash right there. So there it is. Hey, I see it too.
Holt also mentioned 3 star-like lights in the sky in his memo. These are thought to be actual stars. There were 3 bright, prominent stars in the sky that night, including the brightest of them all, Sirius. Their position in the sky matched what was reported by Holt and Burroughs. Researchers on this subject suggest that the differing colours and apparent movement of these stars were in fact caused by atmospheric conditions on the night, but few fully buy this suggestion. Could the brilliance of these stars cause dazzle in their eyes, which they then mistook as streaks of light? The lighthouse does seem an irrefutable debunk. Researchers have been able to categorically place the lighthouse in the correct area compared to the testimony of the men. So, did absolutely nothing come down in the forest that night? I'm with the debunkers, who have provided comprehensive explanations for most, if not all, of the events of that night. I'm of the opinion that nothing otherworldly happened in the forest that night. There was a series of real but unrelated events that happened over 2 nights, which have been misinterpreted by the men on the ground. These unrelated events, taken together and sprinkled with a little bit of UFO magic, have been made to be greater than the sum of their parts. These men weren't at home. They weren't used to our forests and our sometimes unusual atmospheric conditions. The fireballs, the Orford Ness Lighthouse, bright stars in the sky, rabbit diggings, axe marks left in the trees by foresters. Maybe this series of perfectly explainable events and phenomena happened simultaneously so convincingly that grown men, experienced airmen, were fooled to the extent that the world would still be talking about this today. But there's such a gulf between these apparently innocent explanations and what some of the men said they saw that night. It's hard to listen to their accounts and read their statements and then point to 3 stars in the sky in a lighthouse with a meteor chucked in for good measure. But that's where we are. I accept the debunks, but I'm still leaving the door open in my mind that something else must have played a part that night. And I don't mean extraterrestrial visitors. There just seems to be something missing from the story. Did overactive imaginations take over? Were unidentified actors and pranksters involved? At work somewhere in the mix? Some have certainly suggested so. Is it possible that 30-odd men were just running through the forest, chasing after a beam of light from the Orford Ness Lighthouse? What were they doing with their Geiger counters? And what did they expect that would achieve? Did they know how to use them? And did they even know how to interpret the readings? If all of these men had simply stayed in their barracks over the 2 nights in question, tucked up in their comfy beds, would anyone else in Suffolk have paid even the slightest attention to these lights? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please click the like button. It really does help the video to be seen by more people. And please consider subscribing. That way we might see you again. From Rendlesham Forest, the scene of Britain's Roswell. Goodbye.